Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to Cultivate. I'm your host, Ty Fisher, and we have a special treat for you over the summer. We're going back to the beginning of our podcast, and we are picking out some of the most meaningful and important podcasts that we thought you would enjoy listening to again over the summer. We also know that for many of you, we'd welcome you to go back to seasons 1 and 2, but we know that a lot more people are listening now than were at the beginning, so you might have missed these podcasts. And today we have a podcast that is really, really important. It's a conversation that I had with Pastor Ted Tripp. Pastor Tripp wrote the book Shepherding a Child's Heart that many young parents read when they're thinking about how they're going to discipline young children. But the second part of the book is really about how the way you need to approach your relationship with your child changes as they get older. And it's a really powerful conversation about how to maintain your parental influence as your children get older and eventually as your authority has to give way to influence. This is a conversation from July 2022, and we hope you enjoy this conversation. Ted, thank you for being with us today.
I'm looking forward to our time together, Ty, and happy to be with you. And very thankful to be participating in something Veritas is doing, because Veritas, I think, has a much larger footprint than perhaps you realize in terms of the impact that you're having on Christian education throughout the country. So I'm really thankful to be participating with you.
It's very kind, Ted. So let's just jump right in and let's talk about what are those main responsibilities that God's given parents as they relate to their own children?
Yeah, I think the big deal in a word is nurture. We're called to a nurturing relationship with our kids. And often parents think about parenting in terms of behaviors. How can I constrain? How can I motivate? How can I manage my kids? I think nurture is a key, which is why we use the term shepherding a child's heart in the title of the book, because it's that nurturing relationship. It's really unpacking the idea of Ephesians 6:4, fathers, don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord, or the nurture and admonition of the Lord is translated various ways. But I think, that nurturing relationship is helping your child understand himself, helping him to understand his heart, what the natures of his temptations are, because kids are different and they don't all struggle in the same places. What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? How does he need the grace and power of God, encouraging him with the power of the gospel and understanding his profound need for grace and how to find himself, how to understand his callings in life. So I think that whole role of being a nurturer, a mentor, if you will, of this child, and you were tracking with him through the stages of his maturation and trying to be that trusted person who can be a person of influence in his life.
Ted, that's already just so important what you've said, because so many times I see people fall down because what they really want is a system. They want a wooden system that they can apply that will assure them of an outcome, whereas what God gives us is really good principles. And then he says, now you as a parent have to fit those principles into the lives, into that relationship, that mentoring relationship that you're going to have. Right. They're going to have to be fitted to this particular child. And I have 4 daughters, and sometimes they would be, they look a lot alike, but what their mom and I would tell people is, but they're not a lot alike. They end up being very different anyway. So let's talk about how does that parent-child relationship change as children enter the teen years? Because this is one of those areas where Emily and I went back to the book, when our kids were on that cusp of being teenage girls. And we are so thankful that we did, because it was really helpful principles that you gave when the kids were younger. But I think even more important to understand how that has to change as they get older.
Yeah, I think that, one of the ways I talk about it when I'm doing seminars and I talk about being a parent of a teenager is I want to cultivate a relationship that gives me influence with this teenager. Because I recognize that he or she, they're growing, they're on the cusp of being adults. They may even be as large as I am physically already, but they're on the cusp of being adults. And I need to be respectful and wise in my manner and tone and the way that I engage them. I treat them with respect like another person. And often I think, by way of analogy, if you were trying to influence somebody to a deeper Christian walk or just to growth or just in a friendship, you would not treat them like a 4-year-old. You would treat them with respect and courtesy as a maturing person. And we need to do exactly the same with our kids. So I think our manner, our tone, the way we give direction, even things just like having a vision for the fact that what I can accomplish just by being an authority in this child's life is decreasing every single day because he's spending more and more time away from me. He's imagining himself already independent of me. But what I can accomplish as a person of influence grows because the more I cultivate a relationship, then the more I have influence with that kid. I think that is such an important thing for us to pursue as parents.
Yeah, that was such an important part of the Shepherding a Child's Heart book for the folks here in Lancaster and for my family just in particular, is to recognize how that authority and influence proposition works, and that as the authority decreases, what you're looking for is for that influence to rise.
Right. Which means I'm investing myself with this person. I'm cultivating that relationship. I've got to cultivate that relationship. I can't presume it's there just because I'm the dad. Cultivate that relationship.
Yeah, I'm thinking about ways that I've done that. And then I'm thinking about ways right now that I've blown that as well. So what are some of the ways that you would really encourage parents to think about this is how you invest, and maybe some pitfalls that you see parents fall into that really cost them a lot of influence in the lives of their children?
Boy, there's so many things that come to mind. I'll take the negative side first, but I think Proverbs say, reckless words wound like a sword, but the tongue of the wise bring healing. And, when you're saying to a teenager, don't hang out with losers, only losers hang out with losers. That might even be good counsel depending on who your child's hanging out with, but those words will never make that counsel that works with your teenager because they're destructive words. They're reckless words that wound like a sword. You hurt your child with those kinds of words. So I think we've got to be very careful in the ways that we speak, that we use the tongue of the wise because the tongue of the wise brings healing. I think also avoiding arguing with our kids, just not having a fight with them. And sometimes just being able to step back and say, honey, I think you understand what I said, and I'm not going to argue with you. I love you, and, we can talk about this another time, but I'm going to leave the room right now, and I want you to know I love you, and I'll be praying that God will help you to accept what I'm saying. I'll pray that God will help me to understand you better and to understand his ways. But we're not going to have a fight. Yeah. I think that is so important.
Ted, it just reminded me of, I've had some interactions with people that read the first part of Shepherding a Child's Heart about authority, and they got that part of it down really well, and they just continued it into like their children's teenage years, and things, of course, are not going to go very well if you're behaving in that way. And then I would say, hey, that's not what the book says about teenagers. You should go back and read it again. And I kind of explained what you just said there, and they're like, oh, golly, that's kind of soft and relational. They were like criticizing the book. I'm like, it's the same book. It's the same book.
I've often had this conversation, Ty, where a parent will say to me, in effect, they're saying, okay, my child's too old for corporal punishment. What can I use now? And what they're asking is, what will be the big stick I can use now that's inappropriate to use corporal punishment? And really what they're asking for is what will have the kind of give me the kind of ability to control this child that I had when I was able to discipline a 2-year-old physically. And they're asking for that big stick. They're not asking, how can I be an influence in this kid's life? They're asking, what can I use now as a means of control? And I think, they really had misunderstood the role of corporal punishment with the young child.
Yeah.
because the role is not control. The role is to underscore the importance of God's ways and in a very tactile way to say to this child, you cannot go your own way and ignore what God has called you to do. He's called you to honor and obey mommy and daddy, and we must insist on that because it's good for you. So they weren't understanding spanking appropriately, which is why they're not. They think, well, the book has taken a turn here. It's too soft. It's too cushy. But actually, I just wanted to mention something that popped in my head that is a very, very common problem with teenagers. And I suppose it happens sometimes with dads and daughters, and maybe even with dads and sons. But with moms and daughters, a very common thing where they end up arguing with each other, and the daughter gives a flippant response, and mom comes back with another flippant response, and they end up having a war of words. And as soon as you do that, mom becomes her sister. She loses her authority because she's having a cat fight now with her daughter, and they're just sisters now. And it's so much better just to say, honey, I'm not going to fight with you. I love you. We're not going to have an argument. And I think you understood what I said, and I'm going to pray for you, and we'll talk about this another time.
Yeah.
And just get out of, I think always with teenagers, whenever the conversation gets difficult and you're feeling testy, the kid is being testy, it's not going well, jump out of the conversation.
Well, in some ways, that's analogous to not giving corporal punishment when you find yourself angry or
exactly.
that you're not in sorts, because you're going to damage the relationship that you're trying to build.
Yeah, that's a good connection, Ty. You're right. You're exactly right. It's the same thing. It's just in a verbal sense.
Yeah.
We don't want to persevere, in those conversations. You want to step out of the conversation and say, well, talk about this later. I've even had times where I said to my teenager, you know what, I'm feeling very upset with you right now, and I don't want to continue a conversation when I'm in this frame of mind. Forgive me. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to pray for us right now. Just pray that God will help us. We'll talk at another time, and just get out of the conversation, because I can't trust myself. If I feel I'm getting upset and I'm going to begin to be destructive in the words I'm using, then I've got to step out. I can't do that because words cannot be unsaid.
Yeah.
You can apologize for your words. You can say, I'm sorry for what I said, but you can't unsay what it's out there. And I think we've got to be so wise. Just another comment, just an observation about moms, because moms are so often with the teenagers. They're interacting with kids after they come home from school. They're spending sometimes more time, that kind of time than a dad does. But I think with boys, moms have got to be very, very careful with teenage boys. Talk to them with respect. Treat them with respect. You're still an authority, and they need to honor you and obey you, but you want to speak to them in ways that are respectful of their personhood as young men who are growing into manhood, because men will avoid a relationship with someone who disrespects them.
Yep.
And if you disrespect your teenage son, he's going to pull back from you, and it'll break your heart. So it's so important to talk to him like a young man, not like a 4-year-old.
Right.
Don't talk down to him. Talk to him like a young man. And be respectful in your tone and manner is such an important thing. Because this is all under that big heading tie of how do I cultivate a relationship of influence?
Yeah.
And, if I can go to the positive side of that question for a minute, I think understanding our kids, understand what their interests are, learning what they want to do, helping them in pursuing any legitimate interest, facilitating that with them, doing it with them, creating those times for you to interact. One of my brothers, my youngest brother, Mark, where he had a teenage son, I noticed Mark is really bulking up. I said, man, Mark, you spend a lot of time at the gym. Yeah, he says, Jacob is in lifting weights. So we lift together every morning. We go to the gym together before school. And I spot for him, he spots for me. Well, you see what he's done. He's created context where he's pursuing something his son is interested in. They have the drive time to and from the gym. They have the fun banter that takes place when you're doing something athletic together. Come on, give me 3 more. Don't whip out on me. That kind of fun stuff. And it's relationship. It's relationship stuff.
Yeah.
It cultivates relationship.
They're being men together. Right.
Exactly.
And that's what's going to build a relationship. But what if a parent comes and listens to this podcast and says, but I've really blown it. I don't have influence with my teenage son or daughter. Where would you just say, how do you start heading in the right direction?
Well, let me suggest a book real quickly, because my wife just published a book in the last year on this topic titled It's Not Too Late. And it's really about how to redeem broken relationships with teenage, late teenage, and young adult children, because that's a huge issue in Christian families. But one of the things she emphasizes is if you have a broken relationship with your child, you've lost influence because you have a broken relationship, your child is harboring anger towards you, and some of it there may be ways that you genuinely have sinned against this child. Some of it might just be his sin, his struggle, his rebellion. But, we're never so pure in relationships that, the sin is all on one side. I mean, the problem of sin in the broken world is we sin and we are sinned against. So if I've hurt my child, I need to disarm that rebellion. That's what she talks about in this book. So you disarm the rebellion because the child's justifying his rebellion. He's justifying it by things that you have done and said that he thinks are inconsistent or wrong or so forth. So you undermine that, you disarm that rebellion by saying to this child, I know you've been hurt by me, and I want to give you the opportunity. I want to listen to things that you have in your craw, things that you feel like I've sinned against you or I've hurt you, and I'm willing to hear them. And even talk to them, I want you to say it in a respectful way because I don't want you to dishonor God as you say it. But I want you to tell me ways I've hurt you, and I want to facilitate that conversation. So I think a parent has got to facilitate, and they've got to not defend themselves. Because if you defend yourself, then the child feels you didn't hear me. If you say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but here's what I was trying to accomplish. I know I bothered you, but it was really, you're really saying it was really legitimate. Maybe I didn't do it the right way, but my goals were good. So that defense, as soon as you do that, the child feels like you didn't hear me. This is just the same old. But you've got to say, I am so sorry. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I understand why that hurt you. I can't change it, but I can ask you, please forgive me. I don't want to hurt you like that.
Yeah.
But if there are things that you could say in your defense, you're not going to mend the relationship by defending yourself.
Yeah, so important, so important. But to dig a little bit deeper in that, what if you're a parent of a teenager and this teenager is just rebelling against your standards, rebelling against God's word? Just it seems like they're kicking everything to the side. How as a parent can you deal effectively or seek to cultivate ways or influence to pull them back in the right direction?
Yeah, I think one of the things we used to do with our teenage kids, we have 3 adult children, when they were teenagers, and we were blessed, none of them ever totally dug in their heels against Christian faith. But there were times when they were objecting to our standards and felt like our standards were over the top and so forth. And we had this conversation many times with them. We'd say to them, honey, I understand that you don't agree with the choices we've made, but I want you to realize we've made those choices conscientiously. We've sought to understand what is God calling us to and how can we structure our family life. So we want you to understand we're operating in conscience. And I used to say to my kids, surely you wouldn't ask me to have standards that are contrary to what I'm convicted of. I mean, you wouldn't ask me to do that. These are not just arbitrary. And I used to say to them, one day you're going to have a home of your own, and you'll be in the role of establishing the standards for your home. Mom and I have the right, at this point in life, we have the right and responsibility to establish the standards in our home. And as you live in our home, we're asking you to cooperate with our standards. And one day you'll have a home of your own. You'll establish your own standards. We will never come into your house and try to change them. We will understand who you are and the choices you've made. But right now, that's what we're asking you to do for us. And I think that, we were able to walk through that with our kids various times, and sometimes grudgingly perhaps, but have them recognize, okay, there's a fairness to that. You're trying to be honest. You're trying to establish standards. You understand that I don't see it the way you see it. But we can't possibly expect that we're always going to see everything the same way. But since this is my home in a way that's not your home, I have headship in this home. Your mom and I together have established standards that we believe honor God and help us to live together in ways that are wise. So, we've thought that through, and we're asking you to respect the choices we've made.
Yeah, that's so important. One of the things I see parents, as maybe especially parents in this generation struggling with, is when to step in and when to let your teenager fail or struggle with something. So,
Yeah.
what thoughts do you have there?
Well, let me give you a passage, and we'll talk about the passage. But I think about Galatians 6. It says, I don't have the Bible open in front of me, so I'm not going to get these verses exactly right. But it says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And then a little bit later, it says, everyone should carry his own load. And there are two different words used.
Hmm.
The word burden, bear one another's burdens, is when there's a crushing weight, when there's something that is a burden that comes upon you. We want to bear one another's burdens. I want to help you. If you're overwhelmed with something and I can help, I want to help you in a way that's legitimate for me to help you. But I'm not going to insulate you from carrying your own load. And the word that's translated, everyone should carry his own load, is a word that would be used to describe the cargo in the ship. You don't do a ship a favor if you put it out on the high seas without cargo, because the weight of the cargo in the ship gives the ship greater stability in the water. We want to let our kids help them to carry we want to encourage them in carrying their own load. So I don't want to carry their load for them. I want to bear their burdens when it's something overwhelming. So I think that there may be times when they're floundering, and I'm not stepping in to carry it for them, but I can step in with wisdom and say, here's some ways you could approach solving this problem. Here's some things I could suggest to you that you could do. And you can consider those things and decide. So, I think we've got to be careful. There is an important sense in which they need to carry their own load. And we've all learned through failures. So there's sometimes allowing them to fail is going to be appropriate. But I think even in those times, as a nurturer, as a mentor in this kid's life, that was stepping up along the way saying, here's a way that you can solve this, perhaps. And, did you ever think about doing it this way? And then I'm going to step back and let them do it. I'm not going to implement it, but I'm going to, make suggestions that I think are appropriate. We're going to watch them fail sometimes. I have a son who has done everything in life the hard way, and he's done most things in life twice. Because of that.
Well, and he's learned things in particular ways because of that.
That's exactly right. So sometimes I just stand back and I think I could give him great advice. But Mark and I have made it a habit, as with adult children, we do not give unsolicited advice. So, we've just made our habit where I'm not going to tell them how to do things, and I'm going to just pray for them, pray they'll be successful in the things that they're trying to accomplish. And he's accomplished a lot of things that he wouldn't have accomplished without the failures. But I think, letting them fail sometimes is important. But I think that principle of Galatians 6 kind of gives you some tipping points. Everyone should carry his own load, but I want to help bear their burdens where there's times when I can. At least give mentoring advice about how they might approach this task or how they might accomplish this successfully.
Yeah. We've talked mainly about parents and family today, but the Christian life is a life that's lived not just in families, but in the broader Christian community. So how can the Christian community, especially in local churches or Christian schools, support the spiritual growth of teenagers?
Yeah, I think we need to engage them. We need to interact with them. We've got to take them seriously. And also, we have to challenge them and inspire them to nobility. I think a great book for kids is that book, Do Hard Things, by the Harris brothers. It's challenging teenagers with noble living and making hard choices. And I think they need the inspiration of that. They need to have those inspirational, aspirational people in their lives. And so I think engaging them. In churches, as pastor, I used to always be talking about this with the congregation I serve. You should know the names of every kid in this church. You should know their names. You should speak to them by name when you see them, and not just pass by them like they're invisible as you're on your way to talk to a real person, an adult. Engage kids, know them, learn what their interests are. If they play Little League baseball, find out about that. Go online, figure out what the schedule is. Hey, how'd your basketball game go last night? Hey, did you wrestle in the wrestling tournament last week? You're engaging, you're talking to them. They realize you're a person and you're concerned with them and interested in them. So I think in the church, That is so important. Barna says that the most important congregation any pastor has are the children and young people in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he's writing in light of his studies as a data freak that by the time kids are 7 or 8 years old, most of them have already left the church. They may still be coming.
Yeah.
But their minds ain't left. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that we've got to, in the church, we've got to engage kids and provide context for them to have ownership, not in the sense that they're becoming elders or, you can go overboard that way and say, well, the elder board should be demographically reflective of the congregation. You can't do that. But I think that you can say, we want to provide a context for these kids to have ownership. If it's even leading youth group meetings or leading activities nights when the youth group is doing an activity, or working on a committee for the youth group and that kind of stuff, where you're providing a context for them to have ownership and for them to be taken seriously is just so important. And of course, in Christian schools, you can do that with, having your chapel worship team that is helping in the worship and recycling that team. It doesn't matter whether it's the finest musicians up there each week, but if kids have any facility, let's have 2 or 3 worship teams so that several kids have an opportunity over the course of a school year to be part of that. And it gives other kids something to aspire to. It's so important to be investing in those ways with our kids and to be challenging them to ennobling living. One of my sons, he has such a great habit. He never let his kids do, even in jest, speak about one another in noble ways. Oh, what a retard. Those are just words you cannot use in our home. Your brother's a creature made in the image of God. He's not a retard. He's a person made in God's image. If he's behaving foolishly at this moment, you can talk about that. But you can't denigrate him with your words, because those are destructive words, or words that wound like a sword.
One of the biggest issues that Christian parents face, especially as their children enter these teenage years, is just the use of technology. How can we, as Christian parents, build relationships and standards and principles that bless our children and keep them from harm in this area of technology?
Well, I think it's such an important area, and I have several observations about that, Ty. One is on the front end, when you're giving your kids technology, of course, by the time they're teenagers, they already have access to it, but I'll just throw this out anyway for the sake of parents who have younger kids. Be very wise and thoughtful about the way you give technology to your kids. In my opinion, no 8-year-old in the world needs a smartphone for safety. If he needs a phone to be able to call somebody in an emergency, get him an old flip phone that can only call numbers and has very awkward texting abilities so that he's not texting with it and not taking pictures with it. And so I think we need to be real wise. I always tell parents when I'm doing seminars, never give your kids a smartphone. When you think they're ready for a phone, you say to them, I bought this phone. It's on my plan. I pay for it each month. And it's my phone. And since it's my phone, I have the passwords for it and all that. But I can see you need a phone. And so here's a phone of mine that you can use. And here are the conditions under which you can use it. And my encouragement to parents is put those conditions in writing. Here's the conditions under which you can use it. You sign it, they sign it. Otherwise, you're going to argue endlessly about what the conditions were. And then say to them, if under these conditions you'd like to use this phone of mine, I would like you to be able to use it. So that there's a world of difference between that and saying, here, I bought you an iPhone. Because as soon as I give him that iPhone, whose phone is it? It's his phone.
Yeah.
And he's going to be upset if I pick it up and start scrolling through it to see what it's been doing or where it's been. But if it's my phone, I have the right to pick it up. That's part of the agreement. One of my sons, they had a rule in their house with teenage boys, no screens in the bedroom. No screens in the bedroom ever. Don't take the phone to bed with you. And so when the kids were going to bed, they would give their phone to their dad. Dad would put it on to charge. It'd be ready for them in the morning, all charged and ready to go. He also would have an opportunity then to scroll through it and see, where it's been, to see if the history has been recently erased, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And just monitor what's going on with the phone. There are some apps that will monitor your kids' phones, but I would not totally trust that because kids are very clever about getting around those things. But in any case, I think just being engaged with that process and being wise, and thoughtful and slow I have a grandson who's 15. He just recently got phone service just during this current school year. Now, he's had an old phone in his pocket for a couple of years, but it didn't have any service. So if he was in a Wi-Fi area, he could use the Wi-Fi. But if he's not in a Wi-Fi area, he had no phone service at all, very limited. So he's not receiving calls from people and very limited ability to interact with social media because he didn't have phone service. But it did give him a phone in his pocket because the social pressure of a 14-year-old not having a phone is huge. And so he had a phone in his pocket. And I guess probably only his best friends knew they didn't have service. But, he had a phone he could pull out and look at when the other kids were pulling out their phones and looking. And then being thoughtful about giving them that technology. I think we need to be just real wise and careful with how we give technology to kids and have standards for it. And my advice always to parents is, kid already has an Xbox, but he's playing video games all hours of the day and night because he's doing it all over the world with teams and everything else. You're going to have to dial that back. You're going to have to sit down with him and say, okay, I gave you this Xbox. We didn't have any restrictions on it initially. I think it's taken too large a place in your life. We need to rework.
Yeah.
How are we going to use this appropriately?
So it's not.
But I wouldn't take it away.
Yeah, it's not about the Xbox as the source of all evil. It's about the Xbox as something that needs to fit into a balanced diet of your life. Exactly. So you say, okay, where's the Xbox fit in? After chores, after I do my homework, if I have time, how long a day? Parents should decide that with their kids. I think if you do it on the front side, you can say half hour, whatever you decide is appropriate. If you've already given it to his kid, he's on it all hours, the day and night, then as much as I hate to use this word, you're going to have to negotiate with this kid because you can't just take it away. If you've given it to him, he's going to feel jerked around if you try to take it away and say, oh, okay, no more Xbox. You're going to have to use it properly. I'm going to, give it to the Goodwill. You can't do that because the kid will feel jerked around by that. You got me an Xbox, now you're taking it away. But I think you can sit down with him and say, okay, let's think through and talk out what is a reasonable use of the Xbox and negotiate with this child. I think, when we're engaging teenagers and we're not in agreement, you want to look, if possible, for a win-win solution where you're trying to understand, okay, what are you trying to accomplish with your child? Yep.
And is there some way I can help you to accomplish that without violating my conscience and without opening doors that will be very hard for you to close? Because, the power of this stuff is incredible, Ty. It's so powerful. Teenage boys that get into pornography online awaken appetites and desires that can never be fulfilled in the law of God for a human being. Those desires are going to have to be crucified because your wife can never be that person that exists for your use. I mean, normal sexuality in adult life will never be a replacement for pornography. Pornography is prurient and degrading. Those appetites are going to have to be crucified. The big thing going on all over the country, I've just read recently, is irreversible damage. Are girls who are deciding they're trans, teenage girls, and they get on these websites where there's very compelling, charismatic people who have transitioned, and they're talking about how wonderful it is, and here's how you can get a binder, and you can hide your breast, and here are the things to say to the doctor in order to get hormone shots. These are the trigger words which will enable you. I mean, they're getting advice and counsel, and often parents are clueless about it. And I know this wouldn't be true at Veritas, but in many educational settings, teachers are using their child's preferred pronouns. The parents don't even know that the child has changed their name in school, their pronouns in school, and the parents are clueless, and this is going on, and it's all driven by the internet. So I think we've got to know where our kids' devices have been. We've got to have some access to what they're looking at, and just in order to monitor it. And we need to talk to our kids about it in very constructive ways. Honey, I love you. This is an incredibly powerful tool that has incredible implications. It can be life-destroying for you. I'm not going to give it to you and not monitor it. I mean, it would be wrong for me to do that. It would not be loving you. And I love you too much to do that. So I'm going to monitor it.
Yeah.
because I love you. This is such a powerful and such a dangerous device. So I think we've got to appeal to kids and just be real wise and stay engaged with what they're doing online.
As we finish up here, you were in pastoral ministry for more than 30 years. And I know that human nature hasn't changed over the last 30 years. But how do you think that teenagers and the challenge of parenting them has changed over that time?
There are two parts to this, Ty. I think one part is, how has being a teenager changed, and then how have teens changed. So the being a teenager part, the fact that we have these electronic devices that have such incredible capability means that you don't take a photograph of the fun time you had at summer camp and then look at the photo 3 weeks later after you get film developed and have the memories. There's instantaneous transference between the phone, photos, video clips, and social media. So this thing, you take the photo and immediately it's on Snapchat.
Yeah.
There's no thoughtfulness or care about that. I think also it's interesting, in some ways, some trend lines are constructive. I mean, partying, for example, has dropped from the 80s and 90s and 2000s to now kids, the activities of choice is more binge streaming, so you binge watch something with some friends perhaps. I think the violence and mass shootings and the pandemic, all these things that have been so dislocating in our society have affected kids and have created a lot of fear. I think the social media influencers are far more powerful in the lives of teenagers than celebrities.
I never thought that a day would come where the teen pregnancy rate would be plummeting and I would be distressed about it because they're not even having real relationships sometimes. So, it's a challenging time.
It really is. And, the social peer pressures on our kids are incredible. I mean, if the kid's got a smartphone and he's doing homework and that phone dings, someone's posted something on a snapshot, he feels compelled to give it a like, because if he doesn't, in 10 minutes his friend's going to be saying, "What's the matter? Why didn't you like my photo?" So there's incredible pressure on kids.
Yeah. One
of my sons had this policy: when you're doing homework, mom and dad get the phone, and you get the phone back after you're done with homework, because otherwise that phone is a continual distraction that keeps you from focusing on what you need to do. I think that teens in our culture are much more worldly wise in some ways, and because they're exposed to so much so young. And they're also very cynical. So I think the kids are apprehensive and stressed out and fearful and doubtful, and they have much more autonomy than kids used to have. But, it's very interesting. I was struck recently. Margie and I were reading this book about Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr was an early Puritan in the Protestant Reformation in England. She was the last wife of Henry VIII. She was actually more Protestant than Henry. As we read it, we were so struck with the fact that she died in 1548, I think it was. So this is 450 years ago. And yet the problem of sin, the pressures of wanting to be liked, wanting my own way, it was so contemporary. You didn't have any sense that, wow, things were really weird back then. There were obviously social mores, standards of conduct and so forth that were very unfamiliar to us. But the basic core of human being, the needs of the human heart are the same, and the need for grace, and the need for God, the need for help, the need for strength, the need for the destructive forces within us because of sin to be denied and turned away from and abandoned in the power and grace of the gospel. That's the same. That is, I must say.
Yeah. Ted, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with us. Like I said, we've been so blessed by your work. And I know that that's true for classical Christian schools and for many, many parents all across the country. So thank you for these wise words, and just thank you for coming on today.
Enjoyed being with you, Ty. Thanks for the thoughtful questions. Lord bless you and your work.
Thank you very much. See you later.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Leola, Pennsylvania. If you would like to learn more about Veritas, please visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.